He was an 81-year-old farmer, and his last words weren't a plea for mercy, but a demand for more. He was laid in a field, stripped of his clothes in the September air, with a wooden board on his chest. And then, one by one, the stones began to pile up. This is the story of Giles Corey, a man who chose to be crushed to death. It's a story famous for its brutality, but the shocking reason why he made that choice reveals a horror much greater than the crushing weight of stones. To understand how a man ends up being pressed to death by his own government, you have to get a feel for the world he lived in. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Forget any quaint New England image you might have. This was a small Puritan settlement on the edge of the known world, and it was gripped by fear. Fear of the vast wilderness around them, fear of their neighbors, and a deep, gnawing fear of the devil. This fear was a powder keg, and in the winter of 1692, someone lit a match. A group of young women, who came to be known as the afflicted girls, started having strange fits, convulsions, screaming, and what looked like trances. The diagnosis? Witchcraft. And just like that, a hurricane of paranoia was unleashed on Salem, tearing the community apart as accusations flew, old grudges resurfaced, and neighbor turned on neighbor. And into this chaos walks Giles Corey. He wasn't some gentle old man. At 81, he was known around town for being stubborn, argumentative, and quick to sue. He even had a dark past. Years earlier, in 1676, he was accused of beating an indentured servant named Jacob Goodale to death. He was never convicted of murder, but he was found guilty of using unreasonable force and had to pay a heavy fine, a shadow that would follow him for the rest of his life. He was a prosperous farmer, but he was not well liked, and he was married to Martha, his third wife, a respected woman whose skepticism about the afflicted girls had already put a target on her back. The tragic irony is, at first, Giles Corey was a believer. When the hysteria began and fingers pointed at his own wife, he actually testified against her. He told the court about how she'd stay up late at night, and he mentioned that farm animals had gotten sick. In the supercharged atmosphere of Salem, these small, strange details were twisted into damning evidence. He participated in the madness, but he wouldn't just be another one of its victims. He would become its most defiant. Martha Corey was arrested on March 19, 1692. She was smart, respected, and openly called the trials a sham, which made her a prime target. Despite her fierce claims of innocence, she was condemned as a witch. Less than a month later, on April 18th, an arrest warrant was issued for Giles Corey himself. The very same girls who condemned his wife, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, and Abigail Williams, now turned on him. They claimed his spirit was tormenting them, trying to force them to sign the devil's book. Ann Putnam even claimed a ghost had appeared to her, accusing Giles of that long-ago murder. His past was, quite literally, coming back to haunt him. Giles was thrown in jail, where he sat for 5 agonizing months. He watched as the trials went on, a grim parade of accusation, condemnation, and execution. He saw that the court wasn't looking for justice, it was looking for confessions, and he saw that pleading not guilty was futile. While a few people had escaped the gallows for various reasons, conviction was all but certain for anyone who maintained their innocence and went to trial. The deck was hopelessly stacked. In September, it was his turn. Giles Corey was brought before the court, knowing nearly a dozen witnesses were ready to testify against him. He knew what was coming. Conviction was a certainty, and with conviction came not only death but the forfeiture of his property. According to the law, the land and goods of a convicted witch could be seized by the government. Giles owned a large farm, and he had recently deeded it to his 2 sons-in-law, trying to protect it. But a conviction could undo all of that. Everything he had worked for his entire life could be stolen from his family. He was trapped. If he pled guilty, he'd be lying and damning his soul, but he'd still be executed and his property would likely be seized. If he pled not guilty, he'd be telling the truth, but would be found guilty anyway, executed, and his property would still be seized. So Giles Corey made a third choice, an almost unthinkable one. When the court asked him how he pleaded, guilty or not guilty, he said nothing. He stood mute. Under the archaic English law still practiced in Massachusetts, a person couldn't be put on trial if they refused to enter a plea. It was a legal loophole, a way to protest a corrupt court. But the law had a brutal answer for this kind of defiance. Pain fort, dur, strong and hard pain, a torture designed to force a plea. It had never once been used in the history of the Massachusetts colony. Giles Corey knew the consequences. He knew the agony that was waiting for him. But in that moment of absolute powerlessness, he found one last desperate way to take control. He wouldn't give the court the satisfaction of a trial. He wouldn't let them legally convict him and take his land. He chose to die, but he would die on his own terms. On Monday, September 19th, 1692, Sheriff George Corwin led Giles Corey to an open field next to the jail. As his neighbors watched, the old man was stripped of his clothes and forced to lie on his back. A rough wooden board was laid across his body. Then the torture began. One by one, heavy stones and rocks were placed on the board. This wasn't a quick death. It was a slow, agonizing process designed to break his will. The pressure would have started as an immense weight, then become a crushing, bone-breaking pain. His ribs would have fractured. The air would have been squeezed from his lungs with every new stone. For 2 days, Giles Corey endured this torment. Magistrates came and begged him to just enter a plea and end his suffering. But Giles refused to speak. He never cried out. The court had taken everything from him: his wife, his freedom, his reputation. He would not give them his voice. The merchant, Robert Calef, who wrote about the event, recorded a particularly gruesome detail. As the weight pressed down, Giles Corey's tongue was forced from his mouth. Sheriff Corwin, in an act of casual cruelty, just used his cane to push it back in. As the end neared, as his body was finally failing, he spoke. But it wasn't a plea. It wasn't a confession. It was a command. With what little breath he had left, he rasped out 2 words that would echo through history, a final, stunning act of defiance. More weight. He was telling them to finish it. He was mocking their power, showing them that even in the face of the most extreme torture they could imagine, he would not break. And so they added more stones until the life was finally, brutally crushed out of him. The story of Giles Corey is a brutal testament to one man's will, but he was far from the only victim. The Salem Witch Trials are filled with stories of tragedy, hysteria, and unbelievable injustice. If you want to explore another of these haunting tales, click here to watch our video on the tragic life of Bridget Bishop, the first person executed in the trials. Giles Corey died on September 19th. 3 days later, his wife Martha was hanged on a nearby ridge, a place now known as Gallows Hill, though the exact location was debated for centuries and only recently identified as Proctor's Ledge. But Giles's death was different. The public and gruesome nature of it sent a shockwave through the community. Hanging was a common punishment, but pressing a man to death over 2 days was a level of barbarity that many found impossible to ignore. His death is seen by many historians as a turning point, a moment when public opinion began to turn against the madness of the trials. He became a martyr. And in his final, impossible choice, he won. Because he was never convicted of a crime, the state had no legal right to his estate. His farm passed to his sons-in-law, just as he had intended. But the story doesn't quite end there. While most historical sources agree his last words were, "More weight," a legend grew. Some say that with his dying breaths, he also uttered a curse. "Damn you, I curse you and Salem." The curse was supposedly aimed at Sheriff George Corwin and the office he held. 4 years later, Corwin died suddenly of a heart attack at just 30 years old. For centuries after, an uncanny number of sheriffs in that county were said to have either died in office or resigned due to heart or blood ailments. A legend that only faded when the sheriff's office was moved out of Salem in 1991. Giles Corey's execution was far more brutal than we imagine, not just for the physical torment, but for the psychological horror of the choice he was forced to make. He was a flawed man, caught in a perfect storm of hysteria, who chose an agonizing death over surrendering to a corrupt system. His story is a chilling reminder of how quickly fear can unravel a society, and a powerful, enduring testament to human defiance in the face of absolute injustice. His final words weren't just a request for a quicker end. They were a declaration that his will was the one thing they could not crush.